Welcome to the Spaghetti Wall podcast, where we dive into life.
Both the messy parts and the moments of joy, and everything in between. I'm Jason Wilcox, licensed clinical social worker.
And I'm Dr. Thaen Saelee, a licensed clinical psychologist.
We're going to talk about the difference between toxic masculinity and masculinity, and how one is unhealthy and the other is wonderful.
Today, we have a special guest and privileged to have him take some time off to talk to us about his thoughts. Danny, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
My name is Danny. My pronouns are he, him. I am a creative. I am a designer. I'm a photographer. I actually run my own business and I'm based out of Portland, Oregon.
What business do you run?
I am actually a full-time freelance graphic designer and photographer. I range from small businesses all the way to big companies.
I've seen your work, and Danny, you're just awesome.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about that toxic masculinity, something that sounds like it was pretty important to you, Danny.
Yes.
What makes this topic important to you?
Well, I think my background, I think it's really important to understand. I'm Latino, and so I come from a household where toxic masculinity is very present. I almost feel like it's engraved into us the day we were born. And so more than anything, I feel like I've been learning a lot, but most importantly, I feel like I've also been unlearning. And I think that's really important for how I see myself. One day I want to be a father, one day I want to have a family, being a better brother, being a better partner. And so this is why it's important to me.
So I got to ask, what is your family going to think when they hear you say that there's toxic masculinity in your family?
I think it's very well known. I think the Latino community knows it very well. I think a lot of times certain topics are considered taboo to not talk about. I'm very much that person who is open and wants to have these hard conversations because I feel like there's room for all of us to grow.
And you talked about the unlearning. Could you share a little bit about your experience and what the unlearning has looked like for you?
I think a big part of unlearning hypermasculinity is understanding what it actually means. And the word machismo, which in Latin translates to macho, refers to man. And in my culture, the machismo is very heavy on the male. The man in the house is the provider. It doesn't seem like there really isn't room to talk about feelings. I think there's a lot of suppression in feelings. So when it comes to unlearning, I feel like I've done a lot of work on myself personally to specifically unlearn some of these traits that I feel like are tied to quote unquote the machismo in the Latin community.
And be vulnerable. So, I guess what would you define as toxic or hypermasculinity versus just being masculine?
Toxic masculinity is not being able to talk about your feelings, not being able to feel your feelings. I think it comes with, for some reason, anger. Machismo almost feels dominating. There is no room to feel any feelings, to talk about feelings. Some of the behaviors that are tied to machismo just don't align with who I feel like I want to be as a person. And I think masculine itself, I think one of the reasons why I want to have these conversations are because I never want to project myself as like, oh, I'm healed or I've done all the work and I don't have any hypermasculinity in my life. Before, I feel like all I knew was hypermasculinity traits. And I think toxic masculinity itself comes with certain traits that I don't really align with anymore. And being masculine itself just comes with appearance, roles, typically quote unquote men.
I think toxic masculinity has a lot to do with that dominance. Because I mean, it's fine if you're someone that likes to be buff. It's fine if you're someone that likes to dress in biking gear and leathers, right? Like it's okay to have this masculine identity. It's okay to be masculine. But we cross that line to toxicity once we start making it where it has to dominate, control, or make people less than if they aren't masculine. Right. It's this idea of if you don't want to talk about your feelings, that's okay. But is it also okay that there's others that do want to talk about feelings? Is it okay that some men like to talk about feelings, right? If the toxic masculinity comes into play, Once it's that you can't be masculine if those things are happening. You can express emotions and be in that space. You can do these things and still be masculine. That toxic masculinity overrides that and says you're less than if you're not.
I agree with that. I feel like there isn't anything wrong with being just who you are and being proud of these things, right? Do construction or carpentry, these very traditional male roles, right? Or, yeah, I can lift like 300 pounds. Cool. I think there's this element of the toxicity is when there it comes power, privilege, and oppression. So if your masculinity is used to oppress others or other groups of folks, say like the female community, yes, then that becomes toxic.
Or the LGBTQ community, any of those kinds of communities.
Yeah, those who just does not fit this patriarchal male box.
You brought up a different one, Danny, about how, like being in the head of the house. It's okay if the partnership or the marriage, they both would like the male to be the head of the house, and that's the way they want to operate. There's nothing wrong with that. It's when it's used to override and domineer somebody that says, oh, I'm the masculine. I now am the head of the house and I will rule here. Like that's when it starts becoming toxic again.
And I have a follow-up question for you, Danny, around allowing permission to be something that is not traditionally seen as masculine. Like you, I know you personally from just being in your space and sharing space with you. Like you're very gentle, you're very kind. You have insight to your emotions, you can communicate them really well. And I also see you show up for your partner in a very caring way where you do also take up that space where you're providing, right? And you're sharing tasks and you guys have shared goals and you're moving forward, which is so beautiful. So I'm wondering for you around these other traits, how has it been for you showing up in this non-traditional way of vulnerability and what people might label as, oh, soft?
I think that leads me to think about what healthy masculinity actually means. And to me, I think it's, being a male, you can be strong without being aggressive. You can be confident without being dominating, which is that word again. And then being able to show emotion without shame. And I think that when it comes to my relationships, whoever it is, whether it's my younger brother, whether it's my mom, whether it's my romantic partner, I can definitely have been able to create a safe space to where they can come. I can invite them in.
I think what you're describing is strength, right? Like Thaen a second ago talked about being vulnerable, and what you just talked about is strength, right? I think sometimes people confuse this idea that if I'm not this masculine, strong figure that matches the toxic masculinity, therefore I'm weak, where vulnerability is actually strength. And this idea that there's this softness is that it's weak, that's such a falsehood, right? Like being gentle and empathic for other people is powerful. It's a strength. It creates a connection and influence with others. And if the mind can't see that, you're going to miss a huge part of the beauty of life.
Thanks for highlighting that, Jason. I know the work that I've done with hundreds of people around anger is something that is associated with masculinity. And usually I say that's a secondary emotion. Anger is easier to express than saying I'm hurt. Because guess what? You are required to be vulnerable to go under the anger and say, you really hurt me. It does take so much more strength, courage, and bravery to show up in a vulnerable way and engage with connection instead of anger, because it is easier to show anger. So I just wanted to add on to that, yeah, vulnerability is a strength. You said something earlier too that I wanted to comment on, Danny, that how beautiful it is to allow yourself space in the confidence to know that I'm not healed, I'm healing. And you're not showing up here to say, yeah, like you are saying, I am navigating both spaces. I am navigating and trying to balance for myself what it means to be a healthy masculine man in this world, but also to not take up so much space as I am to oppress and dominate others. So I love that.
So I'm curious, because you've talked about this transition and this journey you're on. What have you found that changed in your life when you went from a culture of toxic masculinity to where you're at now and how you're operating? What's been different for you?
I feel like the most obvious is my relationships. My relationships with my younger brother, my mother, my romantic partner, and now my father, who is almost 60, And so when we talk about the household that I grew up in, I tend to see some of these traits that have always existed in our lives and our family. But now I feel like I'm able to understand my father to a different degree, I feel like now. Whereas before, I feel like we used to bump heads a lot. And I think now I'm able to have patience and give him some grace. And yeah, in all my relationships, I'm able to just be able to, I feel like, be more calm, be able to listen, be able to, have empathy, whether it's regular communication, whether it's conflict. I'm just able to honestly feel my emotions, feel my feelings, being able to even talk about my emotions, being able to like setting boundaries, which is really important in families. My relationships have changed tremendously.
It's interesting what you're talking about on how it's grown. Toxic masculinity in of itself, most individuals that are in the state where they are being toxic masculine, for them to hear this message, it's not going to feel good. They're probably going to want to shut down. They might feel angry. They might not like what we're talking about. So I'm curious, what helped you? What were the things that got you from point A to point B? How did you hear this message? How did you transition into this area where you're masculine but without the toxic masculinity?
I started therapy, which allowed me to go to couples therapy. And I think doing those back to back really opened my eyes. I always say that you can't be what you can't see. And I grew up in a world, I grew up in an environment, I grew up in the neighborhood and in the household that I grew up in. There was no healthy masculinity. And from going to therapy to couples therapy, it allowed me to realize that there was more than just the bubble that I was raised in. And yeah, I will say it is very difficult. It is not easy. And I also understand why it's not easy. So I understand why some of my other male figures or friends, etc. I understand why somebody who looks like me, somebody who walks like me, somebody who talks like me, I understand why it's hard. And I'm able to give them grace because I'm, like I said, I will never say, oh, I'm fully healed and I've reached nirvana. I always say that I'm still here and I'm still present and I'm still learning, which is super important.
Was there a moment for you where you felt it viscerally in your body that there was more to being a human, male, Latino than just what you were exposed to growing up?
Like I said earlier, I am a photographer and I've been a photographer for 10 plus years. And I started with film and I am a digital photographer now. Last year, I specifically wanted to photograph and capture nature. It's like a multi-sensory feeling. You can hear the water, you can feel the water, you can feel the wind, you can hear the trees. When I stepped into those places and when I was photographing all these landscapes, I was able to feel and see, and I felt like I was stepping into a different version of myself. I felt like I was tapping into a different version of my creative work. And, I always say, I want my work to evoke a feeling. When people see my work, I want them to feel something. And I realized that if I couldn't feel my own emotions, or my own feelings, how would people feel if they were looking at my work? So I think that was a transitioning point for myself where I was like, there's more. There's got to be more.
It sounds like being in nature and your shift to doing more photography in nature allowed you to really feel that expansiveness, right? That, oh my God, there's so much more. And I want to feel it. And I want other people to feel that from my pieces that I produce. Awesome.
What I've experienced and how I describe it is a centeredness. When I was at school, the majority of boys were all this mindset that we're talking about. But what I found is that when you move away from that, there's this centeredness that happens. You just feel at peace. It's okay to just be you. And I think it goes to something that could be a little hard for some to hear, but it's the reality that toxic masculinity comes from a place of insecurity. It comes from a place that your masculinity in and of itself, there's a negative core belief wrapped around it. And without describing a negative core belief, we do have a podcast on it and we talk about those things. But there's a negative core belief wrapped around this idea of your masculinity that if anything triggers it, you're going to have this reaction. And I know it was really interesting. There was a story about what would you do if you're a female out in the woods and a bear comes along or a strange man, which one would you prefer, the bear or the strange man? And the majority of females picked the bear over the man. When I read it, for me, it was just a no-brainer. It was like, yeah, that makes sense. But for a lot of people, that didn't make sense. And this was very upsetting for a lot of men. It hit really hard. I remember talking with a man, and he talked about how this was really upsetting for him and his friends and how it really hurt. And so we started talking, and I said, well, think about it for a second. Your wife, how would you feel about her being downtown at night, walking by herself? Would you be okay with that? And he's like, no. And I said, why? He was able to come to the conclusion that he'd be afraid about the men out there because there's a certain portion of men out there that use toxic masculinity to justify very dangerous behaviors and behaviors that are very destructive, especially towards women. And so he was able to get it, and we were able to uncouple that negative core belief that was in there and to be able to see that him just being masculine is okay. The analogy that's out there isn't speaking to him, it's speaking to the toxic masculinity, the destructive part, the part that there are men that would take advantage of that woman by herself in the woods. There are men that will do that and do very harmful things to her. But there's also a lot of great men out there that wouldn't. This is about the ones that would cause harm.
I've never heard that before. It's my first time hearing it. And, I think that I have the ability to have been in or can be in both spaces where I still have relationships where they're still very present, and I can also be on the opposite side. I think being able to hold space and grace for how people think is okay, but I think that there's also a level of teaching and unlearning, and I think being helpful and trying to understand this isn't about you. This topic is important for other reasons. And I think some of those healthy masculinity traits that you have to be responsible and you have to be confident in yourself. And if you're not, then I think that leads to hypermasculinity.
I think a lot of the audience may have, like your client, Jason, taken it personal. You're my wife. Why would you pick a bear? I can keep you safe. So I think you're talking about not taking it personal, not making it about you. There is a bigger picture. Can you give this person grace and go, let me try to understand why my wife is choosing the bear? Jason, I think you did a great job just evoking empathy for this person who was really upset. I'm curious because most of the time when we think about that reactivity, and it sounds like for you, you have become less reactive emotionally and you can, regulate and have these difficult conversations, whether it's with your brother, your mom, your dad, or your partner. I'm curious, what things did you internalize about yourself before you started allowing this space to be both? Like, what were some negative things that you may have thought about yourself because of the toxic masculinity growing up?
Yeah, some of the toxic traits that I feel like I would think about would be like men are weak, men don't cry, men shouldn't show emotions, man up. Some of those I feel like are very common in that world. And I feel like some of those things I would think when I first started doing this type of work, I realized that it was harmful to society. I realized it was harmful to my partner. But at the same time, I realized that it was harmful to men. And I realized that it was harmful to myself. And I think that's super important. I think those two things can exist. I don't think it's like one weights more than the other. I think they're on a scale, I feel like they balance each other out well.
I'm so glad you said that last one, that you said it was doing harm to self, right? That's the thing about toxic masculinity. If someone's struggling with it, first off, they're not going to like the fact I said they struggle with it. But if someone is struggling with toxic masculinity, their mind is going to try to deceive them that it is doing no harm to self. The reality is it is doing harm to self because it'll put you off center. It'll make you into this state where you're more reactive, defensive. It's going to make it so you try to control and dominate. It's going to make it so that anything they do that even inches towards something that's quote unquote not masculine is going to feel so horrible inside, and they're going to want to try to control again, which does harm to self.
It's harmful to society. It's harmful to your partners. It's harmful to people you love. It can be harmful in the workplace. It's harmful to yourself.
What do you think are other really important things on this topic for our audience to know?
I think that once you start the work, it's okay to not get it right. It's okay to make mistakes along the way. It's okay to try something, and if it doesn't work, try something else. I think that healing is not linear, and I think trying to get it right, trying to get it perfect, it's not the way. I think it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to learn as you go.
Yeah, I think you're really echoing what we talked about earlier. It's okay to be messy, to expect that the journey might be messy, and to expect that we will get things wrong. Don't aim for perfection. Don't aim for getting it right all the time. Aim for learning and being curious, because it will get messy and it is hard. This journey of self introspection and learning about ourselves so we can be grounded and center is the objective here. It's not about being perfect or having people assess our value. I also wanted to make the point around the fear that's under the need for control. Usually, when I work with folks, and sometimes this might take a few sessions, sometimes it might just take me asking, and what does that mean? Well, it means I'm this. And what does that mean? Let's keep going deeper, right? So we're peeling back the layers. And usually at the end of it, we usually end up on, I feel the need to do X, Y, and Z to control, to be this way, or act this way, or to respond this way, is because I don't feel good enough. Usually when we peel back all those layers, it's something about not being enough, not being seen enough, not being cared for enough, not being strong enough, not being rich enough, not being loved enough, not being X, Y, and Z. So it's this theme of enoughness that's normally under this facade of having to be X, Y, and Z as it pertains to society and what society expects of us.
The negative core belief,
Mm-hmm.
the insecurity, which then gets projected outwards, and then the mind tries to protect the self. But that's a great message, that there's a lot more joy and happiness that can be found in life when you move past toxic masculinity. And again, I'm not saying that masculinity itself is something that you need to move past. Masculinity is fine. It's the toxic masculinity. I'm curious, I would be remiss if I didn't bring this up, because I hear all the time about toxic masculinity, and people are talking about it all over, it's in the news. But does toxic femininity exist?
I would say yes.
Well, I say absolutely yes, because I'm a female. You know, there is toxic femininity. I'm also a mother. So it's like, oh, you're not cooking enough, you're not cleaning enough, you're not wearing a dress, you're not, you don't have makeup on, you didn't do your hair. I've had people who tell me they have scars from childhood because their mother told them they need to look cuter if they want a man to marry them, that they need to fix their hair and be dolled up, that they need to cross their legs, that they need to stop eating so much because their waistline is going to determine who's going to pick them. I think that is toxic femininity, just to be hyper feminine and to put other people down because they are not fitting this mold of what people see as the female role and traditional feminine roles. And I can tell you, because of this, I do often feel and have that negative core belief come up that I am not a good enough mother. I am not a good enough wife. I am able to see that part of me. And I just go, well, what is my value around being here more for my kids, being here more for my husband, being more present as a family? So I look at these insecurities tapping at my door and I go, well, let me just help focus on my values instead of allowing it to tear me down and comparing myself to social media. There's lots of folks who have these really amazing videos of like how to bake the best meal or how to clean your house. But do I have the energy and spoons to be like them exactly? Probably not. But I do think there is toxic femininity in some of those.
I think there's toxic femininity too, because I think it comes down to humans in and of themselves can have toxic behaviors. And toxic behaviors can get wrapped around a lot of different things, whether it's masculinity, femininity, whether it's even in the LGBTQ community, it can get wrapped around different identities from rich to poor to just across the board. Toxicity can exist. And it's when we have somebody or something trying to dominate, trying to control, trying to put down others that don't meet whatever standard they're saying has to be the standard for the masculinity, the femininity, whatever it is. And it all comes from a very insecure place. It all comes from a negative core belief that's wrapped around this identity piece that they feel the need to have to tear down or destroy or oppress whatever doesn't meet the mold because of whatever negativity it says about self. And again, I know there's going to be people listening going, absolutely not, this is ridiculous. But I just encourage those that feel that way to just maybe pause and think about for a moment and look at life. What would it be like if you weren't wrapped around these concepts that you have to be versus you can be whatever you want to be?
Yeah, no, 100%. I totally agree with that. And I know for a fact that there will be folks who may or may not agree, which is fine. You should disagree. If you believe in something, disagree. And at the same time, be willing to learn, be willing to be open to learning and unlearning. Some of these certain topics, I feel like we need to be talked about. And I think that there is spaces to be talked about, and or those spaces exist where you can talk about them.
There's another thing I think is really important here when we're talking about the healing process and how healthy it can feel when you get through these things. I've worked with lots of people over my years, and there actually was a chunk of my time where I worked with veterans and military personnel. And it's interesting, even in that arena where the whole mantra, the image is this very masculine, powerful man, right? And so it's interesting working with that population and how many I've worked with who that was creating such destruction for them. And by the time that we were done working together and they could work past these things, how much more centered and happy they were in life and how much it changed their experience of life when they got through that toxic masculinity that they were embracing. These were still very strong people that I would never want to get in a fight with. They are very strong, powerful people. And when they shed off this toxic masculinity, how much more joy they found in life.
It doesn't change the things you have that already make you strong. And it's okay to fit in the box of someone who's strong and macho and stoic, right? And internally, you can find happiness and allowing other parts to show too.
Yeah, no, 100%. It makes me think about my personal experience where I feel like some of these things that I've stepped into or have experienced usually are not quote unquote tend to be like masculine enough. But I recently started gardening, and gardening has saved my life. I feel to be self sufficient is so important. Homegrown just tastes so much better. I started gardening, I started cooking my mom's recipes, I have started journaling, and none of these things have ever made me feel less than a man.
It's only added to you as a person. It's only grown you and, like I said, expanded you, right? It's like there's more there I can be. And it doesn't make me less than a man when I learn to cook, when I learn to garden. Actually, it's just make me happier. I want to just thank you so much, Danny, for taking the time and sharing your experience with us here. I would just want to share with you what I'm taking away in that last question that Jason asked about toxic femininity is an insight you guys provided for me in this discussion is that I myself can propel and feed toxic femininity. And I myself can feed toxic masculinity when I believe that I'm not good enough and I need to keep doing something to meet these standards. You really helped me feel that and see that and think about that when you were just bringing it back to yourself, Danny. So I just want to tell you, I'm walking away with a gift that you've given me. So thank you for your time and sharing.
Yeah, I'd be curious, what would you say the takeaway is for our audience?
Yes, the biggest takeaway for sure is healing is not linear, and having these conversations is important and it's needed. If I can do it, if I'm a Latino man, it's possible. Other men who walk like me, other men who talk like me, other men who look like me, other men who come from the same neighborhood that I come from, grew up in a similar household. I just want them to know that it's possible and that there is room and that there's empathy and that there's patience. Feels very good on this side.
I think the one takeaway I would really like our audience to hear is that when we're talking about toxic masculinity, we're not talking about masculinity. They are different, that it is absolutely okay to be masculine. In fact, if you ever met me in real life, you'd probably think I'm a masculine man. I'm also okay with emotions. I'm also okay going into spaces that toxic masculinity would say, oh my gosh, you're not a real man. But if you meet me, you would immediately think I'm masculine because for the most part, I enjoy most of my masculine traits. Like I enjoy it. It's okay. So it's okay to be masculine. We're not saying don't be, but understanding the difference between toxic masculinity and masculinity is important. And masculinity and just embracing it if you want to be like that can bring joy and happiness.
Well, Danny, thank you so much again for joining us here today and having this conversation about how toxic masculinity has impacted you and your ways of working through that and coming out on the other side more expanded and happier.
Thank you guys. Thank you for creating this space and allowing me to come on here and share a little bit about my experience. Super thankful for my family and my partner as well.
Thanks for listening to The Spaghetti Wall. If today's episode stirred something in you, whether it was a fresh insight, a moment of reflection, or even just that feeling that you're not alone, you're right where you're supposed to be. Relationships are messy. So is healing, so is life. But that's where the magic happens. If you found this session helpful, consider sharing it with someone who might need it. And don't forget to subscribe for more real conversations about mental health, happiness, and how we keep going even when life gets tangled. Until next time, keep showing up, stay curious, and remember, the mess is the method.